Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alexis Alvarez. I'm the Director of Statewide Training at Florida Legal Services. I'm so excited to be here today, not only to talk about this subject generally, but always to talk about our veteran clients who always need our attention, who are always in places where they're overlooked and marginalized and not given the attention they need. So for all of you who are here watching this today, thank you for being a part of the community that serves our veterans. And thank you for joining us to learn about this important topic, our non-citizen veterans and the naturalization process. Before we get started, I'll always do my housekeeping announcements. This is being recorded. A copy of the recording will be sent to everyone who is live and anyone who registered. So if you do have to hop off, put out those fires that you normally have to do in the middle of the day, don't worry, you'll still get a copy of the full recording, although we would like to have you here the entire time if possible. Second piece of housekeeping announcements is questions and answers. Please feel free to drop your questions into the chat or the Q&A. I will monitor that and we will address those questions at the end. If time permits, I will present them to our speaker. And I think the third piece of housekeeping announcements is always about CLE credit. This programming was approved for CLE credit. I believe it's 1.0 general CLE credit. I'll double check on that. And at the end of the presentation, I will put that CLE code into the chat. That CLE code will also come to you within 24 hours in an email from Zoom, along with the copy of this recording and any materials from our speaker. So don't worry, you'll get your CLE, you'll get your recording, and maybe even some materials. And so with that being said, I'm going to move into introductions of who we have here today. For those of you who have joined us already on some of our trainings, you know Chesley. I'm very thankful to have Chesley here today. Chesley Roberts serves as the Senior Program Manager for the Veterans Consortium's Legal Assistance Programs. She began working at TVC in 2020 as an Equal Justice Works Fellow, sponsored by Lockheed Martin Corporation. During her fellowship, Chesley managed TVC's Women's Veterans Legal Assistance Program and focused on the unique legal issues women veterans face. In her current role, Chesley manages WVLAP, where she assists women veterans who are survivors of military sexual trauma with their claims for VA disability compensation. She also manages their Veterans Naturalization Assistance Program, which assists veterans who are applying for U.S. citizenship through their military service. Chesley is a graduate of Florida State University and Stetson University College of Law. While in law school, Chesley worked at Stetson's Veteran Advocacy Clinic in St. Petersburg, Florida. She assisted veterans who were appealing decisions denying VA disability benefits. And for those of you who notice I'm out of breath, I just have to say I'm very pregnant and I'm having trouble breathing, but I'm okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Chesley so I can catch my breath. And I'm going to say thank you very much, Chesley, for being here. We started this training series for veterans' rights and law with you, and it's amazing to bookend it with you as well. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Alexis, and thank you for the opportunity to give another training. Very excited to be here. I'll go ahead and share my screen, and then we can get started. Oops.
Let's go. You can go to slideshow and then, yeah, there you go.
Computer froze for a moment, but hopefully that doesn't happen again today. So good afternoon, everyone. As Alexis said, my name is Chesley. I work at the Veterans Consortium. I'm our senior program manager for our legal assistance programs. And one of those programs I manage is our Veterans Naturalization Assistance Program. So through this program, we assist non-citizen veterans who are applying for their citizenship through their military service. We start from the beginning, help them gather evidence, fill out the application, and walk them through the interview process and attend the interview with them if we are capable. So today, I'm just going to be talking about the naturalization process, what it entails, and how you can help veterans become citizens yourself. So just a little bit overview, we're going to start with the background information about how many service members are currently serving that are non-citizens and how many veterans a year are naturalized through their military service. Then we'll talk about the naturalization process, what specific regulations you'll need to know, regulations to follow for naturalization. The application process, I will go through the application with you, point out the questions that may cause veterans' applications to be flagged, and then we'll talk about some recent USCIS policy changes. Okay, so naturalization is a process to become U.S. citizen for individuals who are born outside of the United States. Individuals who are serving or have served in the United States Armed Forces may be eligible for naturalization under special provisions of the Immigration and Nationality Act, INA. The two provisions I'll be talking about today is INA 328 and INA 329. I'll go into more details about what each section requires a veteran to show. And while there are few provisions within these sections that are eligible only for veterans or current serving, the two main things that are big for people who are applying through these two sections are it's free. Normally applying for naturalization can cost up to $700, but if you apply through your military service, it's free. And also it's fast tracked. Right now we're seeing veterans or those who are currently serving, their application can be processed in about 6 to 12 months, where another application applying a different way may be over a year before they get a decision. So to join the U.S. military, non-citizens must just be a legal permanent resident, have obtained a high school diploma, and speak English. About 5,000 non-citizens enlist in the military each year, but the naturalizations of currently serving members have decreased in the recent years. In 2016, a little bit over 8,000 service members were naturalized. In 2019, that number dropped to around 2,500. I will say these numbers probably will be going up soon. There were some policies that were in place that court have ruled that they should no longer be in place. They used to have a policy where currently service members had to wait a period of time before they can apply. That's no longer the case. So hopefully these numbers will go up in the next few years. And just to give you some more background information, the current challenges for non-citizen service members is that federal law requires all military officers to have citizenship, and federal law also does not allow granting of security clearance to non-citizens. So as of 2016, there is about 500,000 foreign-born veterans who reside in the United States, and they make about 3% of our total veteran population. And the two top countries of birth right now are Mexico and the Philippines. In 2019, it was reported that veterans were denied citizenship at a rate 5% higher than civilian counterparts. But however, recent data has shown that the denial rate for military naturalizations actually fell to 8%, which is lower than the civilian counterpart. And this is just going to kind of show you what the top 5 countries of birth for military naturalization are. Between 2016 and 2020, the top 2 were Philippines and Mexico. And then China and South Korea were tied for 3rd, and then Jamaica. But in the most recent years, it's changed a little bit. The Philippines and Mexico are still the top 2, but Jamaica is now number 3. And you can also see that South Korea doesn't round out the top 5 anymore. Also, between 2016 and 2020, Army was the branch where most of the military naturalizations came from, and then Navy, Marines, Air Force, and Coast Guard are rounding out the rest of the top 5. And then recently, Army is still number 1, but Navy has increased a little bit, and then there's Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard. And then just my last statistic is just showing you the age of naturalization. in the past couple of years. So the average age is probably be around 26 to 30 years old. But then also 22 to 25 is pretty common, as well as 31 to 35. So why does a veteran not have U.S. citizenship? They thought they became a citizen when they were sworn in. This could be because they were told by the recruiter that once they swear into the Army, Air Force, Navy, that they will become a citizen. The oath to swear in and the oath to become a citizen is very similar. There's actually like 1 or 2 words that are different. So they may have thought they became a citizen at that time. Their discharge is below honorable or general under honorable. So the INA 328 and INA 329 does require a veteran to have an honorable or general under honorable conditions discharge. If they have an other than honorable or something else, that doesn't bar them from becoming a citizen, but they won't be able to go through the military or get naturalized through the military service. They will have to go about it the other way and have to pay the fee. They could have started applying and then they got deployed before their interview. If they don't make their interview, then they can't finish out their application. They may have been undocumented or have a student visa. And they could have believed they could not afford the application. And like we already mentioned, that most of the time the applications for naturalization may cost between $500, $600, $700. But if you apply through your military service, it is free. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but if they are currently serving, they do have to get an officer, an 06 or higher, to sign off on their application. And that can also cause problems for them. Okay, so a little bit more about the 2 sections we talked about, INA 328, INA 329. So the requirements for naturalization will depend on when the veteran served. They served during a period of hostility or a period of peacetime. Peacetime, you will look at INA 328, and hostility, you will look at INA 329. And here are the dates for what USCIS declares is the period of hostility. Please note that this is different than what the Department of Veteran Affairs does. For Department of Veteran Affairs, they have August 2nd, 1990 to the present as one period of hostility, where USCIS does break that apart. So a little bit more about INA 328, serving during a period of peacetime. So these are the requirements that an applicant and a veteran will need to show. They must be 18 years or older. If they're already separated from service, they must show they served 1 year of honorable service. And for USCIS, that does mean either honorable or general under honorable conditions. They must be a lawful permanent resident. They must meet and reside in physical presence requirements. So this means the veteran must have continuously resided in the US for at least 5 years and have been physically present in the United States for at least 30 months out of those 5 years, immediately preceding the date of filing their application. And they must demonstrate 5 years of good moral character preceding the filing of the application. And they must demonstrate the ability to read, write, speak English, unless they qualify for a waiver or an exemption. So with what we just talked about in mind, these are the requirements for INA 329 for someone who served during a period of hostility. So if they served during a period of hostility, there is no age requirement. If separated from service, they must show they served 1 day of honorable service instead of a year. Once again, honorable for USCIS purposes means honorable or general discharge. They must either be a lawful permanent resident or they have been physically present in the United States at the time of enlistment, re-enlistment, extension of service, etc. This can come in handy if a veteran served while they're on a student visa, or if their green card expired and they're no longer in the United States, but maybe they're in a different country. You still might be able to get them to become a citizen if they served during a period of hostility. You also must demonstrate 1 year of good moral character instead of 5, but still have to demonstrate the ability to read, write, and speak English unless qualified for a waiver or exemption. The 2 main forms you're going to need for the application will be the N400, the application for naturalization, And then the N426, the request for certification of military naval service. The N426 confirms whether the applicant served honorably in active duty or reserves. And then, like I said earlier, if the applicant is still currently serving, they must get this form, the N426, signed by an officer at a pay grade of 06 or higher. You also need to attach their DD-214 or their NGB Form 22 along with this application. So before we get into what the actual N400 looks like and what you'll need, how you need to fill that out, just a little recap of what the naturalization requirements are. You have to fill out the N400 and N426, demonstrate good moral character, whether it's a year or 5 years, depending on when you served, pass the civics test, and we'll talk a little bit more about what the civics test entails. Be able to read and write and speak English, and then take the oath to support the US Constitution. Okay, so the application process. So going through this application, the N400, is time consuming. When we set up a time to go through the application with one of our veterans, we take about 2 to 3 hours to set a time. I would also suggest sending the veteran a list of questions before you meet with them, so they have time to prepare or gather any information they may need. There's 15 parts to this application, and each part must be filled out by the veteran or you as their attorney filling it out with them. So I'm going to go through each part. Some of the parts are pretty self-explanatory. Others may cause the veteran's application to be flagged. And these questions that cause your application to be flagged may be the reason why veterans have a high denial rate or used to have a high denial rate of denials. But the good thing is there's most of these questions you can explain. You just need to know what type of information and evidence to give USCIS. So this is just what the first page looks like for the application. The first thing, make sure you have is the veteran's A number. You'll find their A number on their green card. It will either say A number or USCIS number. Some numbers, especially veterans who have older green cards, their A number may only be 7 or 8 numbers. If you look at the application, it says 9. So if you have a veteran that has 7 or 8 numbers, just put 2 zeros in front of it, and then you'll be able to fill out the application. Each page of the application does ask for this A number. So then part 1 is when you start talking about the eligibility. For the veteran, you'll want to select the box for D, applying on the basis of qualifying military service. The veteran may be able to apply based on the other requirements, but you only want to check the military service. If you check one of the other boxes, USCIS is just going to look at the first one they see, and the other ones will require the veteran to pay a fee. So if you just check on the qualifying military service, they get a free application. Which reminds me, make sure you do not send a check with USCIS. Military service free, make sure you don't send anything with it. Part 2, I just asked for a little information about the veteran, their name, they've ever had a different name, if they served under a different name, if they've been married, etc. So question 4 asks if the veteran would like to legally change their name. Some field offices don't do this anymore. So if your veteran does want to change their name and have a different name on their naturalization certificate, I would call up the field office where they'll be having the interview at and go through the process to see if they do this. If they don't, the veteran will have to just go through the typical court process to change their name. And then question 13 is asked about the exemptions from the English language test. So if the veteran is 50 years of age or older and has lived in the United States for at least 20 years, or if they're 55 years of age or older and have lived in the United States for at least 15 years, they will be exempt from the reading and writing portion of the test. If they are 65 years or older and have lived in the United States for at least 20 years, they will be exempt from the reading and writing test, but they'll also get a simplified version of the civics test. And I'll go into the test a little bit more later on. Part 3 just talks about if the veteran will need any accommodations. Depending on the condition or disability your client may have, you can also file for additional exemptions or additional accommodations, especially when it comes to the civics test. But it's a high standard to meet. The applicant must show they are unable to learn and or demonstrate knowledge of the English and or US history test. So if your client does think they may fall under that, there's a different form to fill out and you have to attach it with this application. Part 4 is just going to the veteran's contact information. Part 5 is getting to the veterans information about the residence. They do have to provide where they have lived for the past 5 years. If they have more addresses they need to provide than what is allowed on the application, then you'll have to fill out additional form. We call it a rider, and I'll show an example of a rider in a minute, and then attach it to the application to make sure you have where they've lived for the past 5 years. Part 6 is where the application gets into information about the veteran's parents. If neither one of the parents is a US citizen, then you do not need to fill this part out. But if one of their parents is a US citizen, then you'll have to go through this information. There is also a chance that your veteran may already be a US citizen based on their parent's citizenship. There's another application to fill that out. It's called an N-600 application for certificate of citizenship. That itself can be its own training, so I'm not going to really go into it, but there is a lot of requirements and conditions for someone to meet so they can already prove they're a citizen. Like I said, I'm not to go into it, but just to make you aware, there is another application you can fill out. Part 7 is just asking about the biographic information of the veteran. Then part 8 goes into the information about the veteran's employment and schools they have attended within the past 5 years. You also want to make sure to document any times where the veteran was unemployed. There may not be enough space for you to put everything in from the past 5 years. You can also add a rider to document that information. And I believe the next slide actually shows you what a rider looks like. But even if the veteran finished school and then 3 months later they started a job, make sure you document that period of three months as unemployment. So this is a rider. We actually got this from another organization. So if anyone wants a copy of our riders, just reach out to me after today's presentation. I'd be happy to share them. But as you can tell, it's pretty much the same exact information that's being asked on the N-400. Just sometimes the N-400 does not give enough space for us to provide everything. So we just use this to continue our answers. This one is specifically for the employment in schools, but we have a rider that can provide more information about the residency and almost any question really. Then part 9 goes into trips outside of the United States. Once again, we need to know how many days they were outside of the United States within the past 5 years. As we already talked about earlier, if your veteran's applying under INA 328, period of peacetime, there is a continuous physical residency requirement. If they don't meet that requirement, if they haven't been in the United States for 30 months within the last 5 years prior to them filing, there may be a good reason. So you may just want to be able to explain it. You can use a rider to explain why. They could have worked outside the United States, so their employment took them overseas, or especially in the past couple of years, maybe they were out and then COVID happened, so they weren't able to get back in the United States. So there is some good reasons you can use to explain why the veteran does not meet that physical residency requirement. Also, if your veteran doesn't know the exact dates they left and returned to the United States, you can use the Custom and Border Patrol website. You put the passport number in, and it can usually tell you when they returned and left. If that doesn't work, then you may just have to go through the veteran's passport with them to make sure you get the exact dates. For part 10, we go into the veteran's marital history. You will need to provide documentation for their current marriage if they're currently married, and every previous marriage if they've been divorced. So that means if they're currently married, you need to give a marriage certificate. If they've been divorced, you need to provide the divorce documents for each divorce. And then a death certificate if applicable in the situation. Then question 4 is asking about the current spouse. So you also need to provide information about their current spouse. And this is a continuation of part 10. But as you can tell, question 8 asks how many times your current spouse has been married. So if the veteran's current spouse has been divorced before, you have to provide information about the current spouse's previous spouses. And you will have to get divorce decrees for the previous spouses as well and add them to the application. And part 11 is asking about the veteran's children. If the children are under 18 years old, then you will have to probably add their birth certificate with the application. And this includes children who are living with them, who have passed away, married, unmarried, just any children, biological or adoptive. Then part 12 is the longest part of this application. This part and all these questions that come within part 12 is how USCIS figures out if the veteran meets that good moral character standard, whether it's 5 years for peacetime or a year for hostility. It's a bunch of yes or no questions that you'll just have to go through the veteran and make sure that they answer each question carefully. So I'm just going to point out some questions that either will flag the application for veterans or may cause an issue for veterans, and what's the best way to move forward. So numbers 6 and 7 ask about taxes. Then 7A asks about, have you ever not filed a federal, state, or local tax return since becoming a lawful permanent resident? For veterans, this may be yes, they may have not filed a return before. If a veteran's income is solely VA disability compensation, which is non-taxable, they may not have filed. So you just need to add a rider to explain this is why they haven't filed their application. Which reminds me, I didn't mention it in the previous slide, but any question in part 12 that you answer yes to, you must provide an explanation for why you answered yes. And we use those by using riders again, and I'll show you an example of another one in a minute. Okay, then I'm going to jump to question 15A. Were you ever a member of, or did you ever serve in, help, or otherwise participate in any of the following groups? A, military unit. Veterans, they participate in U.S. military, so you're going to have to check yes for this one. Then number 17, were you ever part of any group, or did you ever help any group, unit, or organization that used a weapon against any person or threatened to do so? Yes, the answer is going to be yes for all veterans. They are part of the military, part of U.S. military that at some point has used a weapon against someone else. Then depending on what their job was or what they did while they're in the U.S. military, you may have to answer yes for question 17A or B. And then just like the previous question, 15A, you'll have to give a rider to explain why they answered yes to that question. Question 18 is, did you ever sell, give, or provide weapons to any person, or help another person sell, give, or provide weapons to any person? Depending on their job in the military, you may have to answer yes to this. So they worked in the ammunitions depot, they did give weapons to another person, so you'll have to answer yes and then provide an explanation about why they did that. So this is another example of another writer. While you're filling out the application, you're going to have a lot of these, especially for part 12. So this one we have written specifically for question 15A, asking if you've ever been part of a military unit. We just write, I participated in a military unit as a member of the United States, fill in the blank. I served in the fill in the blank from this year to this year. I was discharged with honorable discharge. Please see attached DD 214 and Form N426 for further details of this service. Another thing with the riders, you can see on the bottom, there's a signature. Every rider will need to be signed by the veteran. And like I mentioned earlier, if you want a copy of this rider, please reach out to me and I'll be happy to provide you with examples and copies. And something else you can do on the rider, it's not required, but if your veteran received any awards, were honored with anything, it'll be a good time to add this to the rider so you can show USCIS how good of a person your veteran is. And then you can also use this for question 17, about serving in the military as a group that used weapons. Question 18, that they had to give weapons to someone. You can change this to say I participate in the military. My MOS was fill in the blank. And then one more question that may cause the veteran's application to be flagged is question 19, asking about if they were ever part of any weapons training. All veterans have received some training, whether it's a boot camp or they receive specialized training later on. So you have to answer yes for this. And then you'll use that rider that I just previously showed you to explain about while they were serving, they went through training. You can also explain if they have any rewards or certifications along with that training. Oops. Okay. Then question 22 through 29 is all about criminal history. As you can see, right before question 22, you must answer yes, even if the records have been sealed, expunged, or otherwise cleared. So your client will most likely have to answer yes to one of these questions, and that is okay. So by using a rider, you'll just have to explain to USCIS what happened, why the veteran is no longer, or why the veteran has completed all their service, community service, paid their fine, did the probation, and you also have to show why they won't do that again or why they're a different person. And I really hate to do this, but I have to plug in my computer real quick. It just told me it was dying, so just give me one moment. I am so sorry about that. Should have checked before. But back to the questions. So if your client has to say yes, that is okay. There's ways to explain it. And something else you will want to do is include all court documents. Certified court documents are preferred. And then if the crime or the offense was 10, 20 years ago, the court may not have those records anymore. So you'll have to get a letter from the court talking about the court's policies, procedures, how they don't have these records anymore, because that's just not part of their procedures. You can also add buddy statements or personal statements to questions for these about how you can have your veteran write a personal statement showing that they are no longer that person, they've changed, they've learned their lesson, they're trying to be a better person today. Or you can have a buddy statement about how they have seen their friend be better and they're no longer the same person they were when they committed these crimes or when they got in trouble. So there are some criminal statutory bars that may bar your client from naturalization, and these include murder and aggravated felonies. Example of this is involving theft, a crime of theft, or a crime of violence, if the court has ordered imprisonment for more than a year. And there's also some conditional bars that may bar your client from applying if it's within one of those periods where you have to show good moral character. So it'll be within 5 years for peacetime or within a year for hostility. And these examples of these offenses may be failure to support dependents, or if they've had 2 or more DUIs within a certain time period. So question 23, I just want to point out, it says, have you ever been arrested, cited, or detained by any law enforcement for any reason? So this includes all traffic violations. Sometimes when you're just reading out the question, your veteran may not think of a speeding ticket as something they need to report at this time, but all speeding tickets, any traffic violations, they do have to report. If the fine they had to pay was over $500, then you'll have to get court documents to attach. But if it's less than $500, As long as the veteran just reports it, that's okay. So if you answered yes to any of the questions between 22 to 28, then you're going to have to explain your reason and explain a little bit more detail in question 29. So you're going to have to include why they were arrested, the date, where, and the outcome or disposition of the arrest, citation, detention, or charge. Once again, there's only a few boxes. So if there is more, if you have to report more than the boxes allow, then you have to use a writer so you can add additional information. So before I get to the highlighted questions, question 30A is asking about if they've ever been a habitual drunkard. With veterans, PTSD can be very common, and a common symptom of PTSD is drinking. So if your veteran has to say yes for this, that is okay. But adding a personal statement explaining that due to their PTSD, they had to cope with symptoms, but they no longer do that. They're sober now. They're going through treatment can be very helpful. If they are in AA, getting a letter from their sponsor can be helpful, or even just getting or attaching the rating decision from the VA showing their service connected for PTSD or any other mental health condition can also be helpful. You just want to show USCIS that, yes, the veteran is reporting that they've been a habitual drunkard, but that's not who they are today. So then question 37 is actually the first time Part 12 asks about serving U.S. Armed Forces. So this is the first time since the very first page that this application brings up U.S. military. So you'll answer yes, of course, for this one. Question 37 is the only question, Part 12, you do not have to provide a writer. So as long as the N426 is attached and their DD-214 or the NGB 22 is attached, that's all that's needed. Then some other questions for the military is, have you ever been court-martialed, administratively separated, disciplined? If they say yes to one of these, then they will have to provide a writer. If they've been discharged, and so on. Question 44 is about signing up for the selective service. So if your veteran's a male who lived in the United States at any time between their 18th and 26th birthday, then you will have to say yes for this. But there is a chance they may not have signed up for the selective service, so you can't answer anything else. If they didn't, that is okay. Most of the time, the veteran did live here in the United States between the time period, but they actually just went into the military 18 years old. So I'll show you an example of a writer in a minute, but you can just explain that. If you are working with a client who is a male between their 18th and 26th birthday, and they are not registered for the selective service, even if they're already discharged and already considered a veteran, just sign up with them, help them sign up, and then you'll be able to add the information in. So this is the writer that we use for that question if they have not signed up. We just explained that they are a male who lived in the United States at the time. They did not register with the selective service because they were not aware of the obligation to do so. If they knew, they would have, but instead they joined the military at the age of fill in the blank. So after you go through all those questions, then the applicant will need to just check off the box that they can read and understand English. If they have an interpreter, there is another section the interpreter needs to fill out. The number 2 is about the preparer. If you as their attorney are preparing the application with them, then you'll put your name there. And then the veteran will need to read this and then sign. I suggest not having your client sign until you are ready to actually submit the application. What happens most of the time is you gather some evidence before, you go through the application with them, and as you're talking with them and really getting into the details of these questions, you may realize more evidence is needed. So I would suggest waiting to have them sign and date this until right before you're ready to submit everything. So that is the N400. Then we have the N426. And like I mentioned earlier, this is the document that will certify that they did serve and that was honorable or a general under honorable conditions discharge. And this is the form that if they're currently still serving, the 06 or higher would need to sign. But I'm not going to go through the entire form or this application entirely. But as you can see, it's asking for the same information. What's their name, contact information. It'll go into a little bit more details about where did you enlist, if you re-enlisted, where was that at, when did you serve, dates, and what branch and things like that. Okay, so just a little recap. We kind of talked about this as we were going through the application, but some additional evidence that you will need to submit along with the two applications is a copy of their green card front and back. Unless they're not a lawful permanent resident and they're filing under a period of hostility, you may not have a green card to submit, and that's okay. A DD-214 or the NGB-22 for each period of service. An issue this sometimes causes is the veteran may have served active duty for a certain period of years and then they went to the reserves. And then you give the DD-214 for their active duty service, and then USCIS will come back with a letter saying, oh, we need your DD-214 for your period of reserves. Well, DD-214s are not given for reserve time, so you'll just have to file a letter with USCIS letting them know that we gave the DD-214. It's not we don't have one for the reserve period. But if you have any other documents showing that they served during these years in the reserves, you can include that as well. Marriage documents for each marriage and marriage documents for each of the current spouse's previous marriages. Documents for every criminal charge and conviction, including traffic violations if the fine is over $500. If you can't find the records because the court doesn't have them anymore, then a letter from the court saying we no longer have these records is great. Parents' immigration information if the parents are U.S. citizens, children's immigration information, and then tax information. I didn't say this earlier about the tax information, but if the veteran owes any taxes currently, they must be on a payment plan before USCIS will allow them to naturalize. So as long as you can show proof that they're on a payment plan, that's all they're looking for. So this is what an application packet can look like, and this is how we submit our applications. We start off with a cover letter. In the cover letter, I directly point out if they're applying under 328 or 329, and then I list out everything they'll find in the application. We have the N400, any N400 riders, which you will have some if you're working with a veteran. You'll have at least 3 riders explaining the question about being the military unit, question about being part of an organization that has provided weapons, and a question about weapon training. N426, DD-214 or NGB-22, copy of the residency card, supporting evidence is needed. So that'll be the marriage certificates, court documents, buddy statements, if that's needed for your client. The G1145, I didn't really mention that. It's not a required document, but that document allows USCIS to send emails and texts to your client. Instead of everything coming through the mail, they may send your client a text saying, oh, we received your application today. So if your client does prefer electronic information, then they can fill that out. And then the G28 is the form that attorneys fill out to submit the application, and that tells USCIS that an attorney is on this case. So everything that the veteran receives, you will receive a copy as well. So after you submit the application, then becomes the waiting period. The first thing after you submit it is the veteran will receive a notice with a receipt number, and it will say, we have received your application. But the receipt number can be used to check the status of their case at any time. On the USCIS website, you can just put in your receipt number and it'll tell you what step that they are at in the process. Then after that, sometimes your veteran may have to go to a biometrics appointment to get their fingerprints and photo taken. I don't really know what USCIS's requirements are if someone needs to go versus someone who doesn't. My assumption is depending on when your veteran renewed their green card last, or depending on when the last time they got their fingerprints done, they may not have to go through this step and they may just go straight to the interview. So now I'm just going to kind of what to expect from the interview, how you can help your client prepare at the interview. and then what will happen after the interview. So when you go to the interview, I always tell my clients to bring a copy of the entire application. USCIS will of course have one, but it's good if they have one for themselves. They want to bring their permanent residence card, their passport, social security card, any IDs. A lot of my veterans will bring their VA card, and then also any updated information if there are any changes. So if they have gotten a speeding ticket within the period of waiting, they need to bring information about that and let the officer know. If they've gotten married, gotten divorced, if they have a child, etc. When they get to the interview, they'll be put in a waiting room, and then officer will call them back, and then they will sit in a room with the officer and they'll begin the interview. The officer puts them under oath first, and then they'll start the civics test. So there's a reading, a writing, and a history and government question portion. For the reading, they give the veteran a sentence, and they just ask them to read it in English. And then for the writing, they verbally tell the veteran a sentence, and they have the veteran write it out. As they talked about in the beginning of the presentation, if they meet a certain age and if they've lived in the United States for a certain period of years, they'll be exempt from these two portions. Then for the history and government portion, the officer will ask the veteran 10 questions, and then they must get 6 of them right to move forward. If they are above 65 years or older, and they have been in the United States for 20 years, then they'll get simplified questions asked during this portion. After the civics test, if they pass that, then the officer will go through the N400 with them. I've seen some officers go through the entire N400 from part 1 through part 14. Then I've seen some other officers just pick out important questions they want to get some more information on, they just want to clarify is correct. Almost always, the officers will go through questions about criminal history, and they want to know when it happened, why it happened, and what was the outcome. The documents will always be there to show them what the outcome was, but they just want the veteran's explanation. If, as an attorney, if you're representing the client through the interview portion, you are allowed to go with them and be in the room with them during the interview, but only you'll be allowed. No other family members can be with the veteran. The only other person that could be allowed is the interpreter if they have one. And then if you're not able to go in person to interview, you can also you can peer over the phone. I usually tell the attorneys though, when you are in an interview with someone, your job really is there to be quiet and only speak if needed. The officer really just wants to get to know the veteran a little bit more and just make sure everything on the application is correct. So after they go through the test and they go through the application, then 3 things will happen. They'll either be granted citizenship, denied, or they'll have a request for further evidence. So if it's granted, if there's an upcoming ceremony that day, the veteran may just be asked to go back in the waiting room, and then we'll call them in to take their oath and give them their naturalization certificate. Or if there's not an upcoming ceremony, they'll be told they'll receive the date or be told a date that time and told them to come back later. At the oath ceremony, the officer will take their green card and give them a naturalization certificate. Make sure you tell your veteran to look at that certificate to make sure everything's correct spelling and their birth date's right, their social security number is right, and everything's correct. They can get it edited and updated, but it takes a long time. So just make sure everything's correct before they get the official copy. If they get denied, there's an option to appeal, but they can also refile at a different time. Being denied previously doesn't bar them from applying again. But before they refile, I would talk to them to see why they were denied in the first place. If they were denied because they didn't pass the civics test, then just have them study a little bit more and then refile with them. But if they were denied because they didn't meet that period of good moral character, they maybe want to refile after the period has, like you want to refile once they actually do meet that period of good moral character. Then there's sometimes that the officer really won't tell the veteran if they were granted or denied. They'll just have them leave, and then the veteran will receive a request for further evidence in the mail in a few days. The veteran will usually have 30 days to respond from the date of the letter. Most of the time they're asking for either more court documents or they want copies of DD-214s, some military records. It really just depends on what the officer needs, what additional information they need, but most of the time they're just asking for additional records. But you do have 30 days to respond. If you don't respond in that time period, they will deny the application. So that's the application process, what to expect from beginning to end. In the past year and a half, there's been some recent USCIS policy changes that have affected veterans, so I kind of just wanted to go over them with you. So in November 2021, USCIS issued policy guidance to clarify certain naturalization applications. So due to this policy, the clarifying guidance, we now know that if you're applying for INA on 328 period of peacetime, you have to have honorable service, and you have to also show that they've never been separated except under the honorable conditions. So if the veteran has an honorable discharge from their active duty time, but then they may have gone in other than honorable under their reserve time, if that was during a period of peacetime, they won't be able to file through the military service. INA 329 requires 1 day of honorable service. And so even if the applicant received a different type of discharge from a separate period of service, as long as they have that 1 day of honorable service, that's all that matters. So kind of the example I just gave, if they have an honorable discharge from active duty service, then received an other than honorable discharge from the reserve duty, that honorable service from the active duty is all that matters if they're applying under 329 because they served during a period of hostility. That's not to say that USCIS won't come back and try to push a little bit and be like, no, they did have this other than honorable discharge. As long as you can just show them this guidance and show that they met the standards of 1 day of honorable service, that's really all that matters. And then also came out showing that if an officer receives a veteran that may have applied through a different eligibility requirement and not through military service, as they're talking with the veteran, if they realize they served and they meet the military service guidelines, then they have to be reviewed for eligibility under that provision instead of another provision. Then most recently, USCIS issued policy guidance to address eligibility for service members with uncharacterized military discharges. So it used to be that under INA 328, 329, you have to have an honorable or general. But this policy came out to show that USCIS will take uncharacterized as an honorable or a general. They'll view them as the same. So if a veteran comes to you with an uncharacterized discharge, but they meet all the other requirements, they'll still be able to be eligible for naturalization through the military service. I just like ending our presentations on a good note. So these are just a few of the faces and families that we have helped become citizens. I think at this point, we have helped about 35 veterans become citizens. But yeah, I just like looking at these pictures. I think it's just a happy way to end the presentation. So I see we have some questions, but here's also my contact information. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out. If you want to know even more information about our program, or if you just want those writers, I'd be happy to share anything we have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chesley. And I also like ending on a good note, that positive, brought a big smile to my face, seeing all that success. So I know we do have some questions that came in through the Q&A. We didn't address any of these, right, during the presentation? Okay. I don't think so. So if we did, please let me know.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think we did.
Awesome. The first question I see, it came in around 12:13. So to jog your memory about maybe where we were in the presentation at that time. An anonymous attendee asked, why is getting an officer's signature problematic? So do you recall what that might have been in reference to?
Yes. So the N426, if they're currently serving, they do have to get an officer with a pay grade of 06 or higher to turn off the application for citizenship. I don't know if we have like one direct answer to show why this is problematic. I think it's just because an 06, you may not be working with them every day, so you have to go through your chain of command, and you're just trying to get another person and sign off on your application. That you can't just walk into their office and be like, hey, sign this. You kind of have to go through your chain of command. So I think that's just the issue. It can just take a time period to actually get it done. Then if you get deployed, if you change units, there's just a lot of different issues that could come about.
Sure, the bureaucratic barriers, more of the bureaucratic barriers. The second question that came in through the chat is, what about enlisted, and this was at 12:16. What about enlisted service members who were enticed to join with the promise of getting legal residency? Who helps those people? Who helps them?
I would say that has to turn to us. I do know some units are good about if they see a non-citizen service member come through, they kind of give them the information to make sure they get their application filled out and actually do get that citizenship. But I also think that turns to us as advocates that we need to make sure these service members know that just joining the military and just enlisting, taking the oath of enlistment does not mean they're automatically become a citizen. There's still paperwork that needs to be done.
Right, of course. And so the final question that came in, it says, hello, are surviving spouses whose spouse passed away while not in active duty eligible for any type of expedited application or exempt from any of the fees?
That's a good question. I don't believe so. I think from just my understanding, the exempt from the fees is only for current serving or veterans. I do know that USCIS has granted citizenship after a veteran's already passed away, especially if they died in combat, that they can help with that. But I don't believe any surviving spouses have any benefits. For spouses in general, once a veteran becomes a citizen, then the spouse may be able to get a green card or be sponsored through their citizenship. But I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, I don't see that any other questions came in through the chat or the Q&A. If anyone does have any last minute questions, please feel free to put them in while I take up some airspace with my closing remarks. I'm popping the CLE code into the chat right now. Let me get that for you. And that CLE code is 2300628, N as in Nancy. Again, that's 2300628, N as in Nancy. And that is one general CLE credit and also one immigration and nationality law certification credit. That was the one I was forgetting earlier. And so Chesley, you are getting some accolades in the chat, which is no surprise to me. You really make my job so easy because you are wonderful to listen to, incredibly knowledgeable, and just carry that passion with you for what you do. So I love having you in our trainings. And I can only imagine that the folks listening and practicing in this also do. With that being said, is there anything that you want to end on? Anything? I know you've been speaking the whole time, so you can easily say no, but I always want to pass it back to give you an opportunity if there's any last thing that you want to share.
Yeah, I guess this only last thing is if you are interested in helping a veteran through their naturalization application, we don't know where to find your clients. We do have our program where we mentor attorneys, we'll give you cases and we'll walk you through the entire process. So if this is something you're interested in, reach out and I'd be happy to talk about possibly pairing you up with a client and working with you through the process.
And isn't that link, it's vet pro bono, what is that link?
I'll put the email. Actually, you can just email me. So the chesley.roberts@vetsprobono.org. If you're interested, just send me an email. I'll give you more information and just let you know how you can help out.
Perfect. I'll include your email address in the follow-up email that will come from Zoom along with the recording and the CLE code. That way, folks, if you're looking for any of those extra materials or you're looking to volunteer, which I really hope you all are, I know we're all busy, but it's really, really much needed help and work, you can reach out to Chesley directly. Well, I almost don't want to let you go, Chesley, because I enjoy our time together. But I know it's 1 o'clock and everybody's got to get back to what they're doing. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us, for all that you do for the community, and giving us a great training today.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone.
All right, bye, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.